All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'm joined also by Shauna Navarro, who's on the call. She's one of the members of our team, and she is going to help facilitate some of the different questions towards the end. Or if there's any sort of issues you're having, she should be able to help you in the chat. The format for the call, we're going to spend some time. I've got a little presentation to run through with you, and then we should have some time towards the end as well for questions. But I think it's going to be a really valuable use of your time. One of the things that I'm really passionate about with the Monk Manual is this idea that a lot of times we think of our time almost as how do we go and fit everything in, right? We think of it almost like it's an accounting procedure. We're trying to just budget everything. But I think one way that can be really helpful to think about time is that it's actually something for us to invest, right? And certain things that we invest our time in end up bring about a much greater return than other things, right? And I'm hoping that this hour is one of those times, right? That you spend the next 60 minutes here, 54 minutes here, and then at the end say that, wow, that was really helpful, right? And that's something that's going to really be able to give me some insight into the coming year and maybe approach things just a little bit differently. So let me share my screen here and we will dive in. Just to make sure, can everyone, I'm going to share my screen. If you could just maybe raise your hand. I can only see a couple of people, but can you see my screen right now? Okay, I see some hands up. Okay, perfect. So let me go ahead and run through this for you. I'm going to go into full screen mode and we will get started. All right, perfect. Let me minimize this. Perfect. So today's topic is making 2023 your leap year. And what we wanted to do is present a workshop today that's helping you to start transitioning to thinking about how you can make 2023 a little bit different than maybe your 2022 was or any other previous year, right? Because there's this natural thing that happens already around this time. I know a lot of people are kind of still in the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, but we're going to be coming right up on 2023 soon enough. It's only really 3 more weeks. So we wanted to take this time before things get too crazy to be able to help serve you and give you a few things to have as takeaways. So my name is Stephen Lawson. I'm the founder of Monk Manual. Really, I see my own personal purpose. What I want to do is make investments in people who are helping to create a better world, right? One of the greatest treasures, joys of working in the Monk Manual is the people that I serve. I tend to think that I have some of the best people on the planet that I'm really serving, right? It's a special type of person who comes into the Monk Manual ecosystem. Usually they've worked a certain number of things out. Usually they have other people's best intentions at heart. They want to live a good life. And so I don't take that lightly. And that's where I get a lot of meaning myself is serving the people who I believe are doing things to create a better world. And one of the ways that we try to go and serve individuals through the Monk Manual is by focusing on the whole person, the body, mind, and spirit, right? So we have tools like the physical tools of the Monk Manual 90-day planner, but then we also have various programs that are more formation type experiences, educational type experiences, guided journeys that can help you live an intentional life. I want to highlight this intentional life idea because it's not always obvious what it means to be intentional, but really being intentional means beginning with the end in mind. So it's thinking about the idea of what is it that you really want out of anything, and then thinking, how do I go and retrace my steps back and figure out how do I go and achieve that, right? So if you want to foster, say, peace in your life, you want to be intentional about that and say, how am I going to go and bring that about, right? But it's important to even know what that is that you're intending, to be clear about that. And we'll talk a lot more about that in today's session. So one way you can think about this is we're really focused on whole person productivity. When you normally think of productivity, you might think of kind of this soulless, joy-sucking experience of just constant work and trying to churn out all these widgets. But the thing is human beings are more complex than machines, right? We have a lot going on here. So we try to attend to the whole person, which is not only what we do, but it's also how we understand things and what we're directed to. And we have this cornerstone belief in intentionality as really the key to growth. Uh, Sometimes we try to move growth through. We think we just can kind of will ourselves through it, or we think maybe we need to go and kind of get lucky in one way or another. But we really have a belief that intentionality is the way you bring about change, the way you find yourself flourishing really in any area. And we have some examples on the left, but you can think of any of these areas of life, realms of life, and you really can be intentional about those. And when you're intentional about those things, it can really change your trajectory. So again, this workshop is titled Make 2023 Your Leap Year, but it could have actually been titled The Difference Between the People Who Quit Their Goals in March and Those Who Follow Through. Maybe this resonates with you. It's a very, very common experience to be in December, maybe January, and you're thinking, all right, I want to go and change this thing or that thing. Maybe you're trying to focus on your finances, or maybe you're trying to focus on your spiritual life, or maybe you're trying to focus on fixing some sort of relationship, or you just want to get healthy, whatever it is. You start thinking about these things and you set all these aspirations. But then most people end up finding come March, maybe if you're lucky, you get to April, right? You end up feeling like I didn't really actually follow through with those things. If you want to see that very concretely lived out, go to a gym in January and then go back to it in April. You'll see it's a very different scenario. So what we're going to cover today is really three main things. The first is the number one reason that people don't get the most out of their year and achieve their goals. The second is what's going to get in the way of your most important priorities in 2023. And then the third is how to ensure this year specifically is different from every other year. And at the end of the call, if you've heard of this new program we have coming out called Life Atlas, it is specifically focused on goals, and we're going to be releasing that soon as a pre-order. But we're also, if at the end of the call, going to give a specific discount for people just on this call. So make sure to stay to the end because you will be getting a discount. That's actually one of the best things that we have, right? It's actually going to be on top of our pre-order discount. So make sure to stay for the end of that. So I want to talk a bit about the power of a new year. What's actually going on with a new year? You know, so often we're finding ourselves living through life, right? It's kind of like we're drifting through life. We get stuck in a particular pattern, almost like we're on a treadmill, and we just keep moving, right? You wake up and you do the same thing. You make your coffee in the morning. You might go and do a particular thing after that in the morning, and you kind of have this rhythm to your day, right? And what's interesting, the power really of a new year is that a new year reminds us that our life actually is happening. It's actually happening. And there's time that's passing away and new time that's coming. And time has this interesting way of being really elusive for us. It's not like money where you can go to your bank and see exactly how much you have at a given time. Time just feels like it's always there until it's not. And when we come upon New Year's, we're very aware of time. We're very aware of time that's passed. We're aware of the promise of another year. And so it's a natural inflection point in our lives. And one of the things that's helped by that as well is it's culturally an inflection point, right? It's not just you who's thinking about these things. Virtually everyone's thinking about these things all at the same time. And ultimately, what actually happens with the new year is we're reminded of our potential. When you think about it, there's certain things that come up. You start thinking about what is really the ideal of my life. We all have ideals of our life, right? We all have an ideal version of ourselves. And when I say an ideal version, I don't mean, oh, I feel bad about myself, or I experience a certain amount of shame because I'm like this, right? I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that we have a version that we should be comparing ourselves to in a way that makes us feel bad. But we have aspirations. We generally sense that there's certain potentialities of our life that are yet to be fulfilled, right? And New Year's tend to trigger that feeling, to remind us of that. Now, what often happens, you could almost imagine this line in the middle being the new year, right? And in some ways, this kind of jagged lightning bolt, right? And in some ways, oftentimes we get to that new year, whether it's exactly at midnight on the new year, or whether it's just in that general time, we look back and we feel some level of regret, right? About the past year. It doesn't have to be a very high energy regret. It might just be a certain malaise. It might just be a certain sense that you know what, there was something there that maybe wasn't exact, like we feel like we left something on the table, or we feel like um we just feel like there's something that could have been maybe a little bit tweaked in a different way. But then we also have this hope, right? So we look back and we're like, okay, I can learn from that, but I sense that there's still more, right? And so you start looking out, and there's hope, there's natural hope that tends to emerge with each new year. Now, this is a cycle that tends to happen for us around goals. I share this because it's tied to what's going on with a new year, but it's also very much tied to uh, the experience of any sort of goal setting, right? Where we tend to go and we'll set a goal, and then we end up failing in some way, right? There's more goals. It's probably more common that we set a goal and we don't achieve it than we set a goal and we do. When you just kind of go through your whole history of the different things that you want to aspire to. And there's reasons for that, right? But we go through this cycle where it goes goal, and then we move into what feels like failure, and then we feel disappointed, and then we reset the goal, right? Then we go into the next phase and we say, all right, I'm going to do it again. And this might actually be what it looks like for the way you approach a particular year. Maybe there's some aspect, a bad habit you want to kick. Maybe there is some sort of resolution, like getting healthy or whatever it is. Maybe you've been going through that cycle every single year for a very long time, right? That's not uncommon. If that's something that you experience, it's not an uncommon experience. It's a very, very common experience. The thing is we tend to think that the problem is us. When this happens, we tend to think, oh, well, you know what? The reason I wasn't able to actually go and achieve this goal is because I just don't have the discipline. That's such a common cultural belief, is that we believe that people who succeed, it's because they're disciplined, and people who don't, it's because they're not disciplined. And what that does is it puts a lot of shame on us, on ourselves, but it also attributes, it makes everything feel very personal. Like all failure is personal failure rather than a failure that maybe goes beyond us. And what I would suggest is that a bad system beats a good person every time. Let me explain this. Most of the things in our life uh, are not so much tied to discipline as they are to systems. What I mean by that is, when you think about say if there's someone in an office and they're a good employee, they're a good person, but the system in the office, the culture, the way that the job is reviewed is all messed up. If it doesn't actually give them what they need to succeed, that good person will not succeed. And it's the same thing when you think about yourself, right? A lot of times when we're approaching these goals, what the problem is, we don't actually have a system. We don't actually know how to go and get from where we are at currently, our current state, and then this envisioned state. We don't actually know how to go and bridge that gap. And so it feels like it's discipline, but what it actually is we don't have a particular system in place to help us figure out how to do that. And you know what? This is largely my story. A lot of this workshop, what I want to do is run through basically the three levels that people tend to go through with goal setting, and the evolution of I think what's the difference between those people who move on beyond March and those who don't. But it's really my story. So know that as I'm going through these examples, these are all things that I have personally lived, right? All the things that I'm going to share with you to kind of avoid, those are the reason I can say them with such strength is because I have lived those things. And I know what it's like when you're living in that way, or when you don't have some of these things worked out versus when you do. So I want to talk about these three most common goal killers. The first is being too nearsighted. So what you could think of this as is one of the first things that's going to be a problem when you're thinking about goals is the fact that a lot of times we don't actually set the goals, right? A lot of times we don't actually envision and clearly figure out what that state is that we want, right? We get caught in this current of our busy lives, and we have some sort of vague idea that we want to get somewhere, but we can't actually map anything out. We can't actually even design any sort of journey to get to this destination because we don't actually know what that destination is. We don't actually know what it is we want. And when you don't know where you're going, you're never going to know how to get there, right? If you don't know that which city in the US you're trying to go to on vacation, it's very unlikely you're going to just stumble into that place. And that can bring this constant feeling of confusion and uneasiness. Maybe you recognize this in yourself, right? Where there's kind of this tension of feeling like you're not really sure what you want. And so then when you're having to go and make decisions and say, what should I go and say yes to or no to, or how should I be investing my time? It can be really confusing and really stressful because we don't actually know, right? And so when we face decisions where we're ultimately trying to orient ourselves towards what we believe is the greatest good, when we don't know what that good is for us, it becomes very difficult. And as a result, we end up feeling this certain sense of, I know I don't want to stay here, but I also don't know where there is, right? And this may resonate with you because I remember being in this particular place, right? I remember being in a scenario of life, a season of life where I felt like I didn't really know what it is I particularly wanted. I was drifting a bit, but I also didn't know where there would be, right? I knew I didn't want to be there, but I didn't know where the other there would be. Now, what I want to suggest is that this actually, in some ways, can be a defense mechanism. When we don't have to go and actually go and envision what it is we want for ourselves, it feels safe. In many ways, it actually takes us off the hook to take on the task of our own lives, to take on the task of our own potential. Because when we set goals and make these hard decisions, we're simultaneously actually holding ourselves accountable to them, right? The second you say, I'm going to go and do this thing, then you have to feel the pain when you don't do it. But if you don't commit, if you don't actually envision these things, if you don't say what it is you actually want, then in some ways you can avoid the pain, right? It becomes a little bit more diffused. And so we have a lot of fear around it because we're afraid, right? We're afraid often of failure. We're afraid of change. We're afraid of losing our security. And we're also afraid of what others will think. And that's something that is probably the most difficult for us to see pinned down. But a lot of what we do is driven by this desire to have approval from other people, right? And we sometimes will stay in a particular box, a particular way of doing things, because we're just afraid what happens if I step out of it. Now, this is the real problem of it, is you're actually buying comfort. That comfort that you're buying is coming at a cost, and that cost is your personal mission. What I mean by that is we have a feeling, a sense that there's some purpose that we can play, some potential we can realize in life that really only we can realize. And that might be, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's on a global scale. It doesn't mean that it's going to be something that's on television, but we have this sense that we have impact we can make, right? In others' lives, even if it's just our neighbors, even if it's just our grandkids or our spouse, in small ways, we know that there's certain gaps of life that only we can fill. And the thing that we sometimes miss is the gift of our life isn't just for us. If it was just about, okay, well, how do I go and gratify my own mission? It's all about us. To me, that would actually be kind of a hard sell. That doesn't motivate me that much. But what does motivate me is knowing that when I move away from my potential, I'm actually taking the gift that could be my life for other people away from them, right? That there's actually good that you can be creating. And when you don't lean into that good, it's not just you that suffers, it's other people that suffer because there's actual good that you could be bringing about in the lives of others. And if you don't choose where to direct your time, your energy, your creativity, and more broadly, your goodness, others are inevitably going to choose it for you. And it might not be a specific person. It might just be the cultural zeitgeist, whatever it is, whatever kind of the forces that be in your world direct you towards. Maybe you get tasked to go and do this thing or that thing, and you're on whatever committee. I don't know, right? There's all these ways that we can go and have other people help direct us in ways that actually could be completely separate from what it is that actually we could be serving the most profoundly through. So the solution is to really take the time to envision the future you want, and then to write it down and make it specific and measurable. So if you're not already doing this, one thing I really encourage you to do this year is really take the time, right? Take some time to envision what it is that you want, maybe more broadly out of life, but especially in this coming year. What is the future that you really want? And write it down. Write it down so that you can go and pull it out later and say, what happened with this? Did I end up doing this? Did I end up living into it? Did I not? Now you might be saying, I already do that, right? I already have been doing that. I've been doing that for 20 years. And I still struggle. Like there's still something that's not clicking correctly. I'm not really seeing progress. Here's some examples, right? There are a lot of people who will go and they'll say, all right, I'm going to go and I'm going to lose 20 pounds, right? And then March comes around and it's not happening, right? Maybe they've actually, it not coming together for them, right? Now there's a reason for that. There's a couple of reasons and we'll cover those, but maybe that's something that you're really familiar with. Now, this goal killer I call pretending to be God. And ultimately, what this is about is we don't actually recognize the fact that we are not infinite and that we cannot do everything. It's going to make more sense when I explain it. But the big point here is that we are finite. There's only so many things that we can do. There's only so many potentialities we can actually live into. And we're not someone who can go and do everything. So it's not enough to just set goals, but we also have to learn to say no. We have to be able to go and say yes to one thing and no to another thing. Let me give you an example. And these are actually not exactly specifically exact goals that I've set, but these are very similar to goals I've actually set. And I think in 1 year, may have set all these, right? So this is an example of what it looks like, and one of the reasons we set ourselves up for failure, right? We might go into a new year and say, all right, I'm going to start exercising every day. I'm going to start pursuing a degree. I'm going to get a promotion. I'm also going to write a book. I'm also going to learn a language. I'm going to buy a house, and I'm going to read 100 books, right? I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but a lot of times we will go and take on just way too much. We lack the focus and the ability to say no to ourselves, to say, what is really essential here? What's the most important thing? What is the signal and what's the noise? Instead, we just try to go and we disperse our energy in all these different directions, and that's very difficult for us to sustain. We often, we think more goals is about growth, right? We think that the reason it feels like we're setting all these goals is because we want to grow. Of course, that's why, right? But that's not really usually the case. If you're someone who sees yourself overcommitting, it's likely that it actually has to do with one of these three things. The first is we're trying to prove something to someone. This is really key. And I hope that this is one point that you take with you, even if this is just one of the only points you take with you. So much of what we do is driven. So much of our behavior is driven by trying to prove something to someone. And as you're looking at goals for the coming year, make sure you take time to look at your goals, look at your aspirations and say, is this something I actually even want? Or is this something that I've kind of tricked myself into believing I want, but someone else wants? Another thing is we're afraid of something. We can be afraid of something and just simply trying to control our circumstances. So sometimes we're setting all these different goals because we're trying to control something. We want to go and get this done and that done and this done and that done. And it's because we need to feel like we're kind of buffered in all these ways, right? That we built up security. It's ultimately actually about security. And the thing is you never really get to the finish line when it comes to security. You can always feel more secure. So that's a goal that's really never ending. And the third is we're unclear about what we value most and what we value least. And this is probably the most common of the three, because a lot of times we aren't actually sure of what we necessarily want. We might be saying, hey, I know I want to be intentional with what I say yes to on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, or maybe even on a yearly basis. But then we get confronted with the fact that we don't actually know what's most important to us. We don't actually know what is it that I actually want. And that can be difficult and frustrating. What I want to suggest is the greatest threat to your top goals are actually your lesser goals. To explain this, what happens is you only have so much energy. You only have so much focus, right? And if you try to go and do everything, you're going to be on some of those lesser goals, the things that maybe don't matter as much. You're going to be going and spending a lot more. You're going to be taking energy that could have been spent on those top goals and giving them to the lesser goals and making it less likely you achieve anything because you're just trying to do too much. A better strategy is to say, I'm just going to choose a few things and really pursue those and say ruthlessly no to everything else. But the thing is not achieving your goals isn't actually the biggest danger. The real danger of not saying no, of not knowing what we want, is that we win and still lose. Let me explain this. There's this quote I love by the American monk Thomas Merton. People may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success only to find once they reach the top that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. In a lot of ways, this is actually a central quote to the whole Monk Manual mission, because part of what I'm hoping to do through the Monk Manual, through all the things that we do, is help people to come into greater alignment with what it is that they actually care about, and then to actually move towards that thing. Because it is unfortunately reality that people can spend a very, very, very long time pursuing things that aren't actually the things that they want. And they can get really successful at doing that. And it can create an illusion that they're winning, quote unquote, when actually they're not, because they're playing a game that isn't the game that they even want to be playing. If we're not careful, we can get remarkably good at building a life that we don't actually want. Now, that's a fairly strong statement, but I see this within even the Monk Manual community, where you see people, individuals who are kind of trying to grapple with the reality that they built some level of their life around something that they don't want. And then they have, in a sense, it can almost play the role of being like golden handcuffs, right? Where there's something really good about it, where there's so much security in it, but they're kind of trapped. It feels like they're trapped. A better way is to do the work up front, right? To try and figure it out up front. And we always have that opportunity, right? We always have the opportunity to go and say, what is it that I really want, and move in that direction. So the solution here is beginning with the end in mind. Figure out what it is you want to do, and more importantly, who you want to become. Then choose to pursue only the goals that support your life's end goal. When we think of beginning with the end in mind, you can do that in any way, right? If you think about, all right, I want to go and say have a day where I felt like I spent my time on the most important things. Well, how would you do that? Well, what do you think is the things that you should be spending your time on? And then figure out how can you build your day around those things. You can do that for months. You can do that for quarters, right? But when you're thinking about your year, what can be really helpful is to just think about your life as a whole. What is it that you want out of your life? Who is it you want to become? What is it that's important to you? Those answers should be the things dictating what you choose to pursue. You might find that there's certain goals. I don't know, say it's running a marathon. Maybe you had that goal, but maybe that goal actually is not connected in any way to what you want out of life. Maybe that goal is just because you have a sister or someone that you know who ran a marathon and you feel like you should be able to do it too, whatever, right? That sounds silly, but a lot of times that is the things that drive us. It's not like we're tapped into that deep sense of self, and we're coming out of a deeper place. We're just kind of reacting. Now, everything else is usually a distraction. The things that are not central are by definition distractions, right? Or they can be. We're trying to always focus ourselves on the things that are essential, that are central. Now, you might be saying, I do that too, right? I also go through the process of saying no. I do that hard work, but I still struggle to follow through on my various goals. The third goal killer is what I call, we try to just wing it. So we do all the work up front. We go and in December or January, we say, I want to do this, I want to do that. Here's the things. We try and name the things, but then we don't actually have a system in place to help see our goals through. We don't actually have any sort of process, any sort of way of making sure that things go from A to B to C to D. We're just kind of hoping. And ultimately, when you don't have a system, you don't really have an action plan, right? You're not able to go and foresee these things. you don't have accountability, because what happens is a good system actually brings in accountability, right? Various checkpoints for reviewing, refining things. But without a system, you're kind of just going, right? And wishing for the best. There's this quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry: a dream without a plan is just a wish. And that's exactly the idea, right? Is we go in with these dreams, and these dreams are good, but part of the reason that we don't end up actually bring these dreams to fruition is because we let the dreams actually be wishes, right? They're not actually supported by any sort of infrastructure. It's like driving from Houston to New York City, and then we never look at a map or a sign, and we wonder why we didn't get there, right? It's not enough to just be like, well, I want to get to New York City. We have to go and actually do the work. The visioning piece should be the time where we're going and really tapping into our the deeper parts of ourselves, and taking the inspiration that comes from that and letting that inspiration fuel us a bit. But a lot of the work is it's doing the work throughout the year, right? It's taking the time to think certain things through, to check back in, and to navigate. So the solution here is figure out how much time and energy you really need to see a goal through. One of the problems that can happen for us is we don't take into account the fact that anything we say yes to is going to probably take some level of time and energy, right? If you go and maybe you're someone who has a tendency to say to pick out things, and I'm like, for example, I'm going to go and exercise for an hour every day. If you add that without figuring out if you actually have the time for that, or maybe taking out another thing that takes an hour, very, very unlikely you're going to be able to maintain that, because it's not like that hour is just going to come out of nowhere, right? Something's going to be sacrificed. And if it's not, you're going to be sacrificed. That something in your personal life is going to be sacrificed, whatever it is. And at a certain point, maybe around March, you're going to give up, because that tension is not going to be worth it. You're going to feel the real pain of pushing yourself, of pushing your life into around a goal that doesn't actually feel like it's supporting your life. You want to also map out the various action steps. So try to lay out what it is that you want to do. I mean, this is a classic thing you probably even remember from high school, right? Where it's like, if you're going to go, you can go and have a paper due and cram it all. But if you go and take a project and break it down into smaller steps, you can go and figure out, okay, well, here's what here's where I need to be at this particular time. If you're writing a book, like, here's, all right, maybe I want to have this mapped out by this time, and I want this mapped out by this time, and you can lay it out, and then it becomes much more manageable, and you also don't fall so far behind. But then you also want to have these checkpoints to review your progress and refine your goals accordingly. One of the things that's in the Monk Manual 90-day planner is this a habit reflection section on the weekly pages. And the reason for that is very similar to this. It's, you can go and start pursuing a habit, but the thing is until you actually start pursuing it, you're not actually aware of whether it's working, whether it's even necessarily the right habit. Maybe you thought it was the right habit, but it actually is a little bit different. And it should be a dynamic process. We need to pay attention and say what's working, what's not. If we say, either I'm going to do this or I'm not, and we don't have the checkpoints, we don't review our progress, then we're not able to realign, to reorient. And most of the time, we have to do that. Our years, if you look back at your last year, it probably didn't go how you expected, right? And that's always going to be the case. That doesn't mean we still don't project out, and we still don't try to anchor our life towards our intentions. But it's the awareness that you do need a compass. You need to operate like someone who's navigating, right? And that navigation means that you have to check in every once in a while. I want to actually give you a bonus lesson. And what I would suggest is this is actually maybe the most important of the four. And this is, we have this tendency to get tunnel vision. It's not just in the end of our year, but we have this tendency where we all have this way of getting really focused in on a particular area of our lives. If you remember this chart earlier, this pie chart, right? You have these various areas of your life. You can probably look at one of those and say, that's something that I tend to really do well, spend a lot of energy on. It's kind of the focus. Maybe there's two that you do that for, maybe even three, right? But generally, there's going to be a couple that stand out as, yeah, that's like the thing for me. And I'm usually spend a lot of time. Your goals probably for the year tend to focus on those things. Now, there's probably also a couple of areas where you never really optimize or never really devote any attention, right? So maybe you're someone who spends a lot of time and energy and focus on work, right? And your goals are largely professional, or maybe they're even for the community, right? But they're still in this category of doing stuff. And you notice that you never really, you're optimizing that work piece, but what ends up actually getting cut and never really getting any attention is the play piece, right? So you end up building this life that's all work and no play, right? Or maybe it's something where you never really take care of your physical health or your spiritual health, right? Or you're never really trying to go and focus on this personal growth or your relationships. We tend to optimize one area of your life at the expense of other areas. And what we need to do is account for the whole person. If we're not accounting for the whole person, our life starts feeling off balance. It feels a little bit lopsided, right? And this is never going to show up like a sharp pain, generally speaking, right? If you think of your relationships don't tend to actually flare up as sharp pains until it's very, very bad, right? At a certain point, a relationship will create sharp pain, right? If you think of like a physical example, most of the time though, it's just an ache. It's just something that feels off. It's like the malaise of life. It's feeling like just something's not clicking here. It's really important that when we think about our year, we want to pay special attention to the places that we normally don't actually put any attention into, because those are probably the areas where you can actually see the greatest return. And this is one of the things that led me to create the Monk Manual. At the time, I had spent a lot of time and energy on productivity, which largely was tied to work, right? And I saw my relationship suffering. I saw myself suffering, a loss of meaning, a loss of peace. And this was actually around the same time I came across this quote that if it costs you your peace, it's too expensive. And I had this experience where I was in bed. I remember thinking about my day and thinking, I don't know where that went, what I did. I know I did a lot, but I just felt so disconnected. And it occurred to me that the reason I was trying to get all this stuff done was because I wanted a sense of peace, but it was actually robbing me of my peace. And that put me on a trajectory to really ask myself, like, how do I go and address my life? If I'm going to flourish, it has to be in every direction. And you could replace the word peace with relationships, character, health, life roles, right? If anything costs you these things, it's probably too expensive. And we use these examples because at the end of your life, these tend to be the things that people care a lot about. People tend to think a lot about their relationships and who they became, right? They think about whether they were attending to their life roles. So the solution in this example is do an honest assessment of your life. What are the areas you tend not to tend? There are areas that you tend not to tend, right? There are areas of your life that you tend to maybe skim over, gloss over, not spend a lot of attention on. And there's probably some work that needs to be done there. And that can be seen in a negative light, or it can also be seen as a positive thing, because it also means that there's potential hiding in that. So here's a few keys to having a great 2023. The first is clarify. It's setting this clear, specific, inspiring goals for the coming year. You want to get clear about what it is that you actually want, because again, if you don't get clear about what it is that you actually want, you're going to be drifting. You're not going to actually be focusing in a particular direction. And that doesn't mean being super rigid. That doesn't mean that you go and you try and control life. It just acknowledges the fact that we have a sense of agency, and our agency can be used for great good, but we have to steer. We have to row and we have to steer our ship a bit. We also need to do the work of cutting. We have to do the work of, after coming up with what it is we want, figuring out what is it that I really want though? What are the things that are needs or the strongest maybe directional pulls versus just like, this would be a nice to have, right? Over time, our nice to haves can become wants and our wants can become needs. So that can become difficult for us, but we want to figure out what are those most important things. And then we also want to commit, right? We want to have a system for mapping these various action plans and maintaining accountability. So you want to have some way of moving through your year and have it up front, right? Have some sort of way for you to go and make sure you commit to your goals, and not just committing to your goals by writing them down, but committing to them by actually saying, this is how it's going to get done. If you don't have a sense of how it's going to get done, it's going to be very, very difficult for it to get done. If you do these things, you're going to move from confusion to clarity, from this feeling of stuckness to a feeling of real momentum, and then also from discouragement to confidence. We don't see how much discouragement impacts us and how much confidence impacts us, but it's really massive, actually, because it's only the people who actually believe that something bigger is possible for them that end up generally moving in that direction, right? And so when we're discouraged, we pull back. We pull back from ourselves. We pull back in relationships, maybe even pull back spiritually, right? But when you're confident, or when you start seeing and moving and feeling like you're getting traction various ways, that's a deeply empowering thing. And it starts to create that momentum. And ultimately, you end up having a greater creative impact in your life and work. And creativity, as we talk about creativity in the Monk Manual ecosystem, it's not painting, it's not drawing, it's acknowledging that you have the ability to create something in the world that otherwise wouldn't exist. That's the potential we all have. That's the hook we're all on, is an awareness that there's a certain creative good that can be accomplished if you say yes to it, that otherwise would not be accomplished. So where to from here? The biggest thing is take some of the ideas that we went through today and make sure you carve out some time. I really, really encourage you, if you get some time off, maybe last week of January, or maybe if you're someone who likes to be ahead of things, you could get into it now. But take some time to really consider these things. As I said in the very, very beginning of the call, there's some things we do that have a very high return on our investment, some things we do with our time that make a huge, huge difference. Spend the time on this, right? It is worth your investment to spend the time to figure out where you want to go, right? And hopefully you'll be able to approach it a little bit different this year. So it's not something where you're like, oh, here I go again, and I'm just going to go and maybe fail at this particular thing, because that's disenfranchising, right? No one wants to do that. And it makes sense why you give up at a certain point. But what I want to encourage you to believe is that actually maybe it's a time where you can go and really lean into something new. I want to talk briefly about this Life Atlas vision and goal setting program. So this is in many ways kind of a perfect fit for a lot of what we were discussing. And you'll be able to learn more on our website about this in a moment. But this is a program that we've been working on. It's actually an evolution of a program that we've done for about 3 years. At first, it was called You Are Here, and then it was called A Year of Fuller Living. And this is an evolution of that program. And it's one of the things that actually has been one of the most popular things we've ever done. So over the last 9 months, we've been working to go and grow this, expand it, think about it even more critically and more intentionally, and figure out how can we create ultimately the greatest or the best goal system for what we believe serves the people that we're serving, right? So that's what Life Atlas is. And it's actually going to be available starting on Monday for pre-order. But what Life Atlas is there's these various training modules. There's this actual physical planner that's similar to the Monk Manual that guides you through these various steps. You go and actually write the various things down, and it's got these cycles to kind of check back in. But what it'll do is help you clarify your vision for your life, set yearly being and doing goals, schedule these action plans, and then every 90 days do this check-in. And that's designed also to integrate perfectly with the Monk Manual.